With the fact that I might be going back to work soon, I've had a few ideas of stuff I should be doing because it's going to be probably next week. So I need to get a few bits and bobs done. One of the things is to get into the loft and get some stuff put away. Now, I did get in the loft. I forgot to take with me things I should have done, which was my witch and my Christmas pug, both from the range. They should have gone in the loft because they're quite seasonal, but oh well. However, I did dig out a couple more bits from the loft, and these are the things we're going to talk about today. So what happened in the loft? Well, I went through a couple of boxes. There's a box I wanted to get out a PlayStation game because I'm a bit oldie worldy, and with my oldie worldy you'll see in my collection where I've got my Switch. Underneath the Switch is a original PlayStation and an Xbox 360, neither of which I really play much, but I wanted to get and look at some of the games I've got in the loft, specifically Tony Hawk's Skater 2. But whilst I was up there I found my box of phones, proper old phones. And when I mean old phones, I mean nowadays with your mobile phones you tend to trade them in and you don't keep them. In the past you used to have to keep your phones or throw them away or sell them to somebody else. I tended to just shove mine in the loft. But today's video is going to be a little bit old school with some old school mobile phones. Now today's video is possibly going to be a little bit longer than normal because obviously I've got a lot of these old phones to go through, so bear with me and hopefully you might see something interesting. So the first phone I'm going to show you is the first phone I got. I think I got it probably about 1996, something like that, I think. 95, 96, maybe. No, I'm not sure. Back then you didn't have a massive choice of networks. I think it was O2, T-Mobile, but that was something else. I think it wasn't called T-Mobile at the time. I think it was called 1-to-1 or something like that. You had Cellnet, which was your O2, so O2 stroke Cellnet, Orange and Vodafone. Now, not all networks offered the same things. Most of the time at that early stage, and that was still quite early for mobile phones, most phones only made phone calls. So the first phones that came out, friends of mine had one of the very first phones, and that was a phone which just had a phone keypad, no display, no nothing. It was just a phone. It was quite expensive to call on, but it was quite fun to use because what tended to happen is that most people who bought them used to use them as toys, really. So you'd get one, you'd stand somewhere, you'd go across the road to the nearest phone box, write down the phone number for the phone box, go back to where you were standing, and you would play with the phone by ringing up the phone box and seeing who answered it as they walked past. Which was usually nobody. Some people did, and then you just go, ha, and put the phone down. Stupid things. Not that I did it, but I saw people doing it. So strangely enough, I didn't buy my phone from a normal mobile phone shop, although there were shops around and sort of a lot of the retailers, or electrical retailers, those sort of places, Dixon's and places like that, were selling mobile phones at that time. I bought mine from a stand at Brands Hatch on, I think it was either touring cars or World Superbikes. I went there to see, whatever event it was, with my fiancée at the time, Janine. She had already bought a mobile phone about 2 or 3 months before me. She bought the Motorola StarTAC, which was the 2-line display Motorola phone. I saw the orange stand and thought, oh, let's go in, have a look. And I walked to get a mobile phone. This one, the Nokia 5.1 on Orange, or it's 5100 I think it was called on other networks, but on Orange it was called the 5.1. This was a massively popular phone at the time. One of the reasons these phones were popular is because it had a very large screen. Now, at the time back then when this came out, the only network to offer text messaging was Orange. None of the other networks actually even offered text messaging of any sort. So you only made phone calls. Whereas with Orange, you had this phone or you had the StarTAC, which as I said, only had a 2-line display, which was a little bit poor. This had a 5-line display. So with this phone, it was a lot easier to send text messages because you had a much bigger display, better hotkeys. Battery life on these phones was immense. These things lasted about 5 days before going flat. So it's brilliant for the purpose it was designed for. The back of the phone was the battery. So it's quite a large phone, quite a hefty phone, but then at that time it was fairly new, and compared to some of the phones, previous mobile phones that have been out, like the Panasonic with the big suitcase, this was very, very light and compact. Mono display, backlit. As I said, Orange were the only company at the time that supported text messages or SMS. The other networks didn't, they just had phone calls only. So Orange started off with the text messages, which meant most people were buying Orange so they could text each other. Because phone calls were still quite expensive. I think they were 35p, 40p, something like that a call. Text messages weren't free. Text messages were about 10 or 12p each. But initially, not that many people did it because there weren't that many people with phones that were capable of doing it. You had to know somebody else had an orange phone to be able to send a text. The things got better when other networks started supporting text. Then you could text somebody on Cellnet or Vodafone or 121 or whatever it was at the time. This, I think, was my second phone. I'm pretty sure it was my second phone. This is the Nokia 5130, which was still a monochrome phone, no camera. It was smaller than the Orange 5.1. And as you can see on this one, it's got a Mercedes cover. The thing about this phone was, these phones allowed you to change the front. So you took the front off, you had your keys, you could change the colour of your keys if you wanted to. I think you could even get ones that lit up. As you can clearly see, this is the X-Files cover. Now, one of the problems I've got is that the box in the loft didn't have everything in it. I think there's another box that's gone missing that used to have the covers and things, because I used to have loads and loads of different covers for this. I even had ones at some point that flipped over at the front. It didn't do anything more than the other phone did. I think the battery was a bit longer. It was different design, so it's a bit quicker for use for the keys, for the text, because it was a bit smaller, a bit more comfortable in the hand. The problem with these phones is you used to pay for your calls and your texts. I think eventually they started including texts a certain amount, not a lot. So your phone bills could be quite expensive. And I remember my phone bills, well, my texts, probably from the end of the 90s to the early 2000s, quite often I was sending something like 800 to 1,000 texts a month, which got quite expensive. The other thing they also did, which they definitely don't do now, is they used to send you an itemised bill. So you used to get an itemised phone bill in paper with every single call and text you sent itemised individually. So if you'd sent 800 texts or 1,000 texts, you'd have 800 or 1,000 printed texts, when you sent them, what time they were sent, and who they were sent to. So your phone bills could actually be quite big and, as I said, unfortunately quite expensive. Now, after that phone, I then moved on to which is probably one of the most popular phones on the market at the time, the Nokia 3310. Now, you can see there's a bit of a pattern here that all my phones have always been Nokia up until a certain point, and I'll show you that, but the only other phones I've had have either been a Samsung or Blackberry. So I've been Nokia all the way through. The only reason people bought this was because you could change the covers. You had different covers on this one. You could change the back as well as the front, whereas the previous phone you could only change the front. This one allowed you to change the cover both sides, so you could have a back and the front matching. And again, I think with this phone you could also change the colours of the keys if you wanted to. You could have illuminated keys. There's all sorts of different things you could do. So basically for fashion and fashion only, it didn't do anything extra again other than the others. Still monochrome display, no camera. Back then on these mobile phones, a lot of people changed the covers both front and back. We also used to change the little screen. So on the screen on the front, you couldn't change the screen as such. What you could do is change the pattern. Instead of it saying Nokia, you could have a little LCD pattern saying something else. You paid, again, sort of 9p or whatever it was for a message to give you a different message across the front. You could pay for different ringtones, and that's when these things were really, really popular. People were texting on every network. Everyone had different ringtones. People were downloading little images to go across the front. They were very, very cool as such at the time. At some point after that phone, I did get another phone. That's one of the phones that unfortunately is being lost in the loft. I had a Nokia 6100. Now, the Nokia 6100, again, was very similar to those phones, but it was a slightly more business-orientated phone. It looked more professional, more business-like. It was a lot smaller than those. It was a tiny phone, very thin, very small in size. Again, it didn't have a camera, but it was the first phone I ever owned that had colour screen. You could download images off the mobile sites, you could set the different colour backgrounds, things like that. So it's quite popular for the fact it was colour. The games were in colour. I think it had Snake on it still, like normal, in colour. You could download other games from mobile sites, but again, all this stuff was quite expensive. But again, as I said, it didn't have a camera on it, so although it was a nice colour screen, it was a little bit pointless. Now, as I'd got used to having a small phone in the 6100, the next phone I got was also very small and a very business-like, quite a posh phone. This phone was offered to me at the mobile phone shop with no deals. Now, I say no deals. My girlfriend at the time went in and got a mobile phone from the same shop that I got mine, and she got a free PSP. You could have had a free set of headphones. I think there was another games console, a PlayStation or something like that. and loads of other deals you could get. Whichever phone you chose, they tried to incentivise you by giving you a free gift. I went in, looked around, couldn't see what I liked, saw this. This is a Nokia 8800. This was a very expensive phone. This one had no deals with it whatsoever. It was a case of, well, if you don't have the PSP, or you don't have the PlayStation, or you don't have the Xbox, or whatever else it was you could get, you can have this phone on the network. This phone was a special edition phone. It's still a Nokia. This phone is all stainless steel. It's a pop-up phone, so actually it slides open. It has a sapphire crystal glass across the front, and for the first time ever for me, it had a camera. They did do a couple of versions of it. They did one of them for Aston Martin, which was a slightly darker finish than this, and it had the words Aston Martin printed in the front, and that was very expensive. This one is actually my second one. The first one I had to go away because it got dust under the screen. So I said it's got a scratch-resistant sapphire glass, which was unique to this phone at the time, but mine for some reason got dust under it. My old model used to say Nokia 8800 on the back. This one came back. It was a brand new phone. It now says Nokia Special Edition on it, and they'd actually unlocked it. So the first one I had was locked to orange. This one was unlocked. I could use any network, and I carried on using this phone for years and years and years. I love this phone so much, I kept on using it. The good thing about this phone, it was sort of classed as a luxury phone at the time. Very stylistic, very shiny, very small, compact, pocket-sized again. It had a lovely little charger you used to sit it in, so stick it in a charger, you would charge the phone, and at the back a spare battery all at the same time. Now that's one of the things I will say about it. Spare battery. This phone actually came with 3 batteries, which you thought, well, that's really nice, they've given you 3 batteries with it. There was a caveat to that, of course, is the fact that this phone lasted rubbish on batteries. Battery life on this wasn't that good at all, unfortunately, compared to all the other phones I'd had previously and all the other phones on the market at the time. This wasn't the best phone for battery life. Now, saying that this phone has 3 batteries, one of the problems I've got is I don't know where any of them are. So I haven't actually got a battery to fit in the phone. But it was still a very stylistic. It looked lovely when it was charging. The little blue light glows when the charger's on. It was a very nice, very cool phone. In fact, this phone featured in quite a lot of films, and specifically in Transporter 3. If you know the bad guy in Transporter 3 and Jason Statham both get given this phone, and even the guy whose daughter's being held hostage get given this phone to use to ring the bad guys.
Phone is programmed to call only one number, mine.
You have until tomorrow, 9 a.m.
Right now, my satisfaction should be a main concern.
Please send the girl out.
She's coming.
I'm not coming. Papa.
And it had a specialised ringtone which was designed by an orchestra at La Scala in Milan. Specialised sounds, specialised speakers that you didn't get on any other phone. So it made it a little bit above the normal phones as such. Now on from that, I think the next phone I had from that, I got a spare phone. So whilst I was still using this phone, I had the need to have a spare phone. And my spare phone ended up being the 6230. Again, another Nokia. This time with a slightly better quality camera. So the camera on this one's built into the back of the phone, so you didn't have to flip anything up to use the camera. A nice big colour screen, but it's plastic so it gets scratched and marked. An illuminated keypad. The nice thing about this phone compared to most of the other phones, or compared to all of the phones I had previously, this phone allows you to put a memory card in it. Now again, you could change the front skin, you could change the back skin. I did at some point have different colours for it. So under this phone's battery is a memory card. At the moment it's got a 32 megabyte, 32 megabyte memory card in it. And strange enough, it's actually got, I think I've got some pictures on here, there's a bit of video, there's about 3 or 4 messages to Leanne that's still on here. It's still got bits and bobs on it, even though it's donkey's years old. So as I said, I had this phone as a spare, it still works. Now the strange thing about this phone is it's one of those phones that needs a SIM card to work. Now it is unlocked, this one again, I can use any network I like on it. It's got an orange SIM in it at the moment, one I found just to get it open, because as I said, without the SIM card it don't open at all. And it's even got, as I said, it has got some text messages to Leanne. Useful little phone, very handy. As I said, it still works. From those two Nokia phones, I made my first change to a different phone and a different network. I eventually ended up with a Blackberry Pearl 8100. I wanted to go to Blackberry phones because that was the start of social networking. Beforehand, on all the phones I've shown you previously, there was no social networking. Facebook didn't really exist. There wasn't anything for me to use to do other than make phone calls and text messages and take the odd picture, send the odd MMS message. But by the time the Blackberry Pearl 8100 had come out, Facebook, Twitter, Bebo and other services had become quite started. They hadn't become really popular, but they'd started. And that was also the start of certain phones were doing touchscreens. I decided I didn't want a touchscreen phone. I didn't like the idea of it. I found it was much easier to text using touch buttons. And I liked the idea of the Blackberry services, the messaging service, the email service, and some of the other services that they offered seemed better on Blackberry, so I went for the 8100. Now, unfortunately, I haven't got that to show you now because it got stolen. So I lost that Blackberry phone. So, in the meantime, whilst that was lost, I managed to secure another Nokia. And this is sort of like the successor to the 8800. This is the 6600 Nokia. Again, this phone has actually got life. This one's actually much bigger display. It's actually bigger than the display on the Blackberries. And this one, again, will start without a SIM card, luckily. There we go. So this is a very small, nice phone. It's like a metal case still, metal front, metal sides. Tiny little thing. To use it, you open it up and you've got your keypad underneath. Although you could use the functions on the menu using this key and all the start buttons and the soft buttons without having to pop it open. But again, like with a lot of phones, it has a camera on the back. You will notice on this phone though, however, unlike the other phones, this one was one of the very first phones with a flash. So you could actually take pictures at night with a flash. It's only a 3.2 megapixel, but again, compared to the other phones that were sort of 640, 720, or not even a megapixel, this was quite a big thing. But I only ever needed this as a spare until I got another Blackberry. So this was my spare phone. I think I had it on gift gaff at the time. I just charged it, it still works. It's got the odd message to Leanne on it still, a message I've sent her, an odd picture of me with a moustache, which is pretty awful. I don't know what I took that, to be honest with you. Yeah, video of the cat when he was a kitten, like you do. So it's a useful phone, and as I said, this was invaluable to me when I needed to contact Leanne when my other phone went out of action. I had to have something. This was quite good. I didn't have Facebook on it or any of the other services, but it did its job. So of course I then replaced that, did get a proper Blackberry. This one here. This is the 9105 Blackberry Pearl. It's the follow-on from the one I had before. The one I had before had a little rolly button, as you've seen in the picture. This one had a little touch thing. It's actually purple. It's very difficult to see, and I don't know if you'll be able to see it here. But this bit here is actually purple. But it's, again, great, beautiful phone. It's not very big. I don't like, or didn't at the time, like big phones. So this was all my Blackberry services, Facebook, Twitter. Well, I didn't use Twitter, but Facebook mainly for me. It was way before WhatsApp even existed. It got a camera. This one has a flash on it. The other Blackberry used to slot into like a little wallet thing, which was a pain in the backside really. You took it in and out of this wallet. This one, you just had little rubber covers for it. I couldn't change the fronts and the backs on these phones, so I ended up getting little covers for them. But these were very useful, and I used this phone for years. I deliberately avoided getting a touchscreen phone because I wanted to have the feel of the keys, and I didn't want anything too big. Now, I do have a touchscreen phone from around that era. It wasn't mine at that era. This thing. This is the iPhone 3. Doesn't belong to me. I never wanted one. Now, I will say straight off the bat, I am an Apple fanboy. I've got Apple everything virtually apart from phones. So, I've got an iPad. I've got iPods. My computers always only ever had and only ever bought Apples. Everything you see on here is done on an iMac. I've got the MacBook Pro. I've got a couple of Macs up in the loft, old ones. I've got the mini Mac. Everything's Apple. I've always been Apple, never had anything else. But with phones, I wasn't that keen. I didn't like the way they were a bit clunky. They were a bit slow. They were cumbersome. The operating system was flawed in the fact that, like with all the other phones that I've had, the Nokias included, even the early ones, you could either connect them to a computer and download programs for them, or download games, accessories, all sorts of things. You could upload and download pictures to them, which you couldn't do on this. This didn't give you the option for downloading stuff to it from a computer unless you went through iTunes, and then you couldn't do everything you wanted through iTunes. Plus it didn't have expandable memory, which every other touchscreen phone at the time, and including my Blackberry phones, had expandable memory. You could add memory to put your memory card in, then store your photos, videos, whatever on it. You didn't have that with the iPhone. This is an 8 gig one, and realistically it would never be enough for what I wanted it for. The reason I've got it now today is nowadays it is in my car and it's just purely for music and music only, because my iPod Touch that I had in there previously died. Suddenly realised that by using Facebook more often, because I didn't get Facebook until 2009, and the only reason I got Facebook then was to enter a football competition to win a World Cup signed by the England team. And I didn't really use Facebook at all until sort of 2010. Later in 2010 started using it quite often, started following a certain person, and that's when I started really using Facebook. So I ended up originally thinking, well, I probably want to get a better phone that allows me to use more on Facebook. That's when I ended up with the Samsung S5. Now, the Samsung S5 I don't have anymore either, because, as I said, newer phones you tend to trade in. So that one got traded in eventually for a newer phone. That phone being the phone I've currently got. I'm not a massive fan of changing my phone very quickly, so at the moment I've still got me Huawei, because I don't think phones haven't changed enough for me to warrant keep changing the phones. They don't do anything extra. The phones that are out now don't do anything really better than the S5 did. There's no new technology's been out. Yes, the cameras are better, the processors are better, the screens are better, but there's nothing that new that would warrant you getting a phone. I'm a photographer in an amateur form anyway, which I use cameras for. The Sony ZV-1 is being filmed on now, the Pentax, the other Sony A Alpha series, other cameras. I've got a load of cameras that I don't need to be using a phone for. The phones aren't that brilliant, even the new phones, and I have used the new phones. Yes, the quality is good, but I'd rather use a camera. The latest technology, I suppose, in phones is flip phones. That's the only new thing that's come out on phones in the last 10 years or so. So a flip phone would be different if I had a flip phone. Having said that, I do have one more phone around the house. It was given to me. So this is the Samsung B3210. This is their sort of version of a Blackberry. So again, it came out around the same couple of years after the Blackberries did. It's their sort of pretend version of a Blackberry. It's not using a Blackberry operating system, it's using their own. But I only ever use it purely as an alarm clock next to my bed, because it's the only alarm clock I've actually got, other than the Google Home. The Google Home alarm clock is a bit daft, because when you tell it to shut up, it just shuts up and that's it. And again, as with everything else around here, it's still got a message from Leanne on it, or a hidden message in the alarms, which was quite cool. She hid that away. I didn't even notice it until much later that she had done that. But that's my alarm clock. That's it for mobile phones for now, for the moment. So a little brief history on phones, what they are and what they've got. They don't all work. Some of them work, some of them don't. They'll probably go back in the loft, to be honest with you. I don't know. We'll see.